that this is such an important learning series. And we have here today Rosa Elena, and I will tell you a little bit more about her. But before, I'm going to go ahead and do the land acknowledgement. Kiwasa grows a welcoming and inclusive community in the vibrant Hastings, Sunrise, and Grandview woodland neighborhood of East Vancouver, located on the traditional unceded occupied territory of Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. So thank you, Indigenous people that have accepted us here. And just a brief, just to look at where we've been. So the first week, as you remember, Mary did a presentation about what is domestic violence and the impact on mom. And I follow with, of course, we have moms that have been impacted with domestic violence, and then how that impacts the children and the environment at home, and how we are passing on somehow, right? We are passing on a lot of beliefs and effect that it has on children, what has happened at home, and that we are continue passing the intergenerational cycle of violence, even though, we're talking about all these different topics about colonization, patriarchy, etc. But at home, we are still reproducing, this situation, and it keeps on going on and on. And then the second week, we had Jason Lee, who talked about his own experience of childhood abuse and trauma in their home, and how that affected him. And he ended up having beliefs that produce feelings of depression, anxiety, and anger. And of course, with that kind of feelings, he had a lot of behaviors that they were not really good for the home environment. And he ended up, of course, separating, divorcing the mom of his child, and his child also didn't want to have a relationship with him. And then when he started having another relationship, he realized, oh, wow, I'm still having the same problem. So he realized that it was something that he needed to heal. He looked for help, and now he's sharing everything that he has learned with that experience. And then the third week, we had Joe from the United Kingdom, that he had a presentation about compassionate inquiry, the Gabor-Mate kind of approach, and how it's better to focus on being as a human being rather than doing, and making sure that we are connected with our children so they feel like they're seen, heard, and understood, so they don't feel that they're alone in this world. And he also showed us how to some simple ideas to look at the children on their eyes, a smile, a nod, and also talked about that when there was a problem between the child and the parent, that the adult is the one that has the responsibility to do the repair. A child that never has to work to make the relationship work. And also, he talked about that my anger, my frustration, all that comes from our own trauma. And then we had Rachel, who did the nonviolent communication, and she said that we need to avoid falling into destructive cycles of blame and criticism, and attention to the human needs instead that govern people's words and action. And it was a really powerful presentation. And then we had Ahmad, who talked about assisting children in integrating their emotions, a neurobiological approach. So he explored the nervous system of children, how connected they are with mom, and how to regulate, and the importance of us as adults, moms, or parents, father, know how to regulate, because the children are picking up the same energy, and how to communicate with children to acknowledge their feelings, engage their cooperation using a non-punishment approach, and build their self-esteem. And for me, it reminds me again that when I look at somebody and I don't like what they're doing, like I judge them, I blame them, is showing me a part of me as a human being that I have disowned, that I have rejected, and that I need to kind of bring it forward to kind of accept it and love it again, in terms of judging, right? And then David, he did the presentation, The Way of the Open Hand, Men, Power, and Conflict. And he talked about how the um, socialization expectation of for men to be strong and not don't be weak is really deep, and it becomes a script, a role that they follow. And he talked about how it's important to name it, to tame it when you're working with a man, and the importance of modeling your regulation also. And that the role of anger, he said that if somebody's angry, frustrated, and all that, we need to be curious and see um, what is under, if maybe it's fear, envy, guilt, shame. Anger is a secondary emotion that is fueled by all these other emotions that are underneath. And yeah, so, and today we come to today, and I'm so glad to know that Rosa Elena is doing this presentation. Know her for a long time, and she's going to be talking about transition houses and supporting women and children in need of transition houses. Rosalena is a trauma-informed narrative therapist and holds a master's degree on narrative therapy and community work with Melbourne University. Rosalena brings over 27 years of frontline experience. Yes, working with working with the anti-violence field, supporting self-identified girls, women, and femmes who have experienced gender-based violence through an intersectional, feminist, and anti-oppression and decolonizing approach. Rosa Elena has created and implemented programs and facilitated numerous workshops on violence prevention and intervention. And I'm so glad to introduce you to Rosa Elena. Take it on. It's all you.
Thank you. Thank you, Marilyn. Marilyn and I, we go a long way. We know each other like we are troopers, veterans in the field. So it's nice to be here. And after you have been sharing everything that has been provided through the series, I'm just I don't know. I was given a topic and I'm presenting based on how I feel I should be presenting. So I have a little bit of safety, talking about safety plan, about supporting mothers with children, talking a little bit about shelters, transition houses. So I hope that what I prepare for you can be useful. So, and I imagine that a lot of you who work in the field have a wealth of knowledge. So yeah, anything I can add to your knowledge or just to be helpful to strengthen that knowledge is great. So I'm going to share my PowerPoint. Hold on a second.
We can see it.
Yeah. So my name is Rosalena Arteaga, and I am a settler and an immigrant in this unceded territory known as Vancouver. I work for Battered Women Support Services, and I have been working with BWSS for over 19 years, almost 20 years. So many years. And I always say that I love my work because I get paid. I think it's a privilege that I get paid to do what I love and to support survivors to become free of violence, to transform their lives and the lives of their families. At Battered Women Support Services, we contribute to the freedom and liberation of girls from gender-based violence, and we affect social change through the provision of direct services, training and education programs. We work on systemic advocacy and law reform because we believe that the problem is not the person, the problem is the problem, and the problem is the issue of gender-based violence and living from our perspective, in a male-dominant society where structures of power have determined who we are based on our social location, and those are contributing factors to gender-based violence. So BWSS have been providing support to survivors of gender-based violence for over 40 years now. We provide crisis intervention, community-based victim services, counseling, legal advocacy, employment program, and other specialized services. And some people think that maybe we have a shelter, and sometimes they call us thinking that we have some transition house or shelter. So we are a service provider. Of course, if someone is in an urgent need to escape from domestic violence, we ask them to come to the office, and then from here, we will support the person as much as we can. But we want to make sure that individuals who need to access our support know that we don't own the transition house or the shelters. Sometimes we have to call transition house workers and beg them to take on someone, right? Because there are different policies and criteria, and I'm going to talk more about that. And I also want to acknowledge that we want to make visible the population we work with. Like, we work with white Canadian self-identified women who maybe are working class, living like in poverty, or maybe they are middle class. We have some upper class people who sometimes prefer to access BWSS, but we have a huge population of immigrant, refugee, and non-status women. And for many years, BWSS has been like working towards making visible that there is an intersection of barriers that women are going to face, based again in their race, gender identity, social location. So women who have precarious immigration status in Canada seek safety and support. And when I started at BWSS, we were one of the few organizations who were supporting women with non-status, because I just want to highlight that there were like immigrant serving organizations. Even though they were immigrant serving organizations, they wouldn't support women who didn't have a status, and we have been making a point to make them visible. So they need support because they are being abused, and their children are being abused by, usually in a heterosexual relationship, is by the father, or there is a threat of being deported, and the threat of being deported is connected to intimate partner violence, the threat of being separated from their children, or as you know, sometimes women enter into the country with their husband, and then they have one application, so then they are afraid that if they report the abuse, then is going to impact their refugee claim and the claim of their children. When working with survivors experiencing domestic violence, and I know you know this, but I'm going to emphasize this, that please always assess and provide safety, because sometimes we ask survivors, oh, okay, do you think you are safe? And then she says yes. But then she thinks she says within the context of the violence that maybe she has been experiencing in her relationship, or the spiral of gender-based violence that she has experienced since the moment that she was born. And we need to do risk assessment, because what we notice is that after COVID, there has been an increase in the level of violence towards women, and feminicides in Canada have increased too. We need to support survivors towards safety planning. We need to support them towards understanding children's safety and support, and support them towards providing the right resources. So I want us to remember, I know many of you may be immigrant people who are working in the field. So we need to understand that when we have judgments about mothers, mothers who may not have immigration migration status or who are immigrant or refugee, we need to understand the reasons why they left their country. So it's forced migration, displacement, gender persecution, sexual violence, oppressive cultural practices. And this is important because in the idea of a multicultural approach, we sometimes celebrate these differences in our cultures, and then we go into la la land that we start celebrating everything. But the reality is that there are oppressive ideas that sometimes keep women trapped in an abusive relationship. Also, sponsorship. We have many immigrant women who marry a Canadian person who promise that they are going to do the sponsorship. And then sometimes they get pregnant, they have a child, and the person never started the sponsorship. And now she continues on a visitor's visa. Then family, or as many of us, a better future. We work with women who have identified that they enter into Canada as child brides, and that they were forced by their own family to engage in a relationship with a person who is maybe 30 years older than her, forced marriages, mail order brides. We have cases that come to our attention, poverty, fleeing the country of origin with a partner, their children, due to other forms of persecution. So sometimes there is this conversation that this couple, they were happy in their country, they escaped from violence, and then they came here, and then when they come here, the one of the people in the relationship, usually in heterosexual relationship, is the husband who gets violent. Then this idea that he became violent because all the pressure about immigration, and of course there are many factors that are going to impact someone's mood or responses. But what we know, what women who access our services have shared with us, is that the violence was already there. And when they came to Canada, it's not that all of a sudden he became violent because of the pressure of immigration, is that he was there. And then there are factors that are going to increase the violence. So there are many factors that service providers should consider when supporting mothers experiencing domestic violence. So one of the factors is intersectionality, and going back to, we don't want to blame mothers for staying or returning into a abusive relationship, right? We want to understand the context within why they are making decisions, right? And again, in my work, we are very political. We work from an intersectional point of view, where we understand that each of us, depending of our color of our skin, the country of origin, the level of gender-based violence that we experience, including cultural practices, we are going to face different barriers. And I always show the spiral of gender violence, which I got it from Marilyn. She brought us to our attention, and I really appreciate Marilyn for letting us know that this existed, because that was created in the States by a group of women who had they were mainly Asian women who were supporting other women in the States, and then they came up with this spiral of gender-based violence. However, I have shown this spiral to many staff members, survivors who access our services, when we have conversations in our support groups. And I think that 80% of the survivors who access BSS have gone through this spiral of gender-based violence, right? And it's important to understand, because when we are supporting a person and they are facing one issue of maybe immediate crisis, and then we provide a lot of support, and the person, in this case, the woman, says, you know, you found a lawyer, you found a shelter for me, you provided all these things, but I want to go back with my partner, right? Because maybe throughout what she went through, the only person who maybe has been better than the others has been that partner, right? Even though he may be horrible, right? And so we need to understand that there is history that people carry with them, and that history may stop them from making the right decisions or the decisions that we think are right for them. And that's why we work from a trauma-informed approach. So we acknowledge that there is a context and there is history, and that we need to support people where they are at, but also to support them in their healing journey, to understand that they deserve other future, that they it's okay to feel safe, that maybe they don't even know how it feels to be safe, right? And if I said, oh, you need freedom and you need safety, maybe for the person doesn't mean anything, right? They have different concepts of what safety means. So it's important to also explore with mothers what is the source of income, because many people who are experiencing intimate partner violence who have children, if they don't have a steady income, it's going to be very hard for them to live an abusive relationship, right? So whenever possible, support her with information and resources to access some form of income that will not jeopardize her immigration status. So that has come also to our attention, that there are women who have precarious immigration status, and then they, of course, they need to survive, and then they are working what we say under the table. So we understand they need to survive, but also it's important to talk about the law in Canada, and that can jeopardize their safety and their ability to stay in Canada. We have had cases where the woman leaves the abusive husband, and the husband calls immigration and tells immigration that she's working in a restaurant. And then we had a case where she was found in the restaurant, and then with the threat of being deported. So it's important to provide that information and to take that in consideration. So when we are thinking about safety planning again and risk assessment, it's important to understand what are the safety issues. Is he abusive towards the children? Have her children witnessed abuse? Because sometimes in some relationships, the father is abusive towards her, but the children haven't witnessed anything, or he is just choosing when he abuses the mother, so that's why the children haven't witnessed. And I have heard from some workers, as soon as they hear that there are children involved within the family and that there is abuse, right away they want to call the Ministry of Children and Families. And I know that in your different organizations, you have protocols and practices that you have to follow. But it's important that we take the time to make an assessment and to help the person, in this case the mother, to understand the Canadian legal system as it relates to child protection, right? Because again, there are different cases. One is the mother thinks that because she is not violent towards her children, then her children won't be apprehended, right? So when I explain to survivors, in Canada, we have child protection, and what it means, that is this law that protects children, and the law is divided by physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, and neglect. So I highlight neglect because many women who come to see me, they think that because she is not abusive towards her children, then she's not at risk of getting her children apprehended, right? And the reality is that when I explain about neglect, means that even though she's not abusive towards her children, then still there is the risk of her getting her children apprehended, because what can happen is that she is seen as the parent who didn't protect her children, and that she has to protect her children, right? So then also we have cases where he's abusive towards the mother, and then she calls the Ministry of Children and Families because she thinks that maybe in that way they can talk to him, or they can maybe stop access from him towards the children. And then also I explained that if she doesn't have evidence that he is abusive towards the children, as a father, he has the right to see his children. So all these conversations have to happen with many of the survivors who access our support, because a lot of the times there is a lot of confusion, right? And also I explained to them that if her children call the police, or the neighbor hears that something is going on and then they call the police, or the children disclose to the teacher that there is domestic violence at home, that then the police, they may come to her place, and they may bring social workers. And if she doesn't want to leave her partner, then her children are going to be apprehended. So I explained to them that it is important that they make the choice to leave in the moment that the police comes to their address. Because many survivors, and again with immigrant women, they don't know. And then when they come to see me, they tell me, oh, I don't understand. They came and my children were apprehended, but I'm not abusive. And then I asked, but did you leave? Did they offer that they will take you to a transition house or a shelter? And she said, yes, but I didn't want to leave because I needed to pack, or I wanted my children to have a home. And so I thought that staying was better. So these kind of conversations are important to have before we put pressure on someone to leave. And what I notice is that a lot of mothers care a lot about their children. And sometimes when I ask them, when you decided to leave an abusive relationship, what triggered, what supported you into making that decision? And usually they say it's because I didn't want to lose my children. Any questions, comments so far?
I have a question actually.
Yeah.
In your experience, when somebody has potentially had their children taken away due to neglect, what would that look like for her? Because I haven't experienced that before, and I'm just curious, like what the line would be, if you know.
So I have had, many cases where the children were apprehended and the mother was not directly abusing them, but she was seen as neglecting them because she knew that the father was violent towards the children and she didn't disclose that, or because the police came and she didn't want to leave. So part of the work we do at BWSS is to provide legal support. So with many of them, we help them to apply for legal aid, to get a family law lawyer, and then we have been very successful. Usually the children, if she is not with the abusive father anymore, then if she is living up in a transition house, or she found another place to live and she wants to get her children back, we have been successful at getting the children back. The only thing is that from the moment that she comes here, we apply for legal aid and we get the lawyer, we go to court, then it can take up to a month, 2 months for her to get her children back. And that is, I share those stories with women who are still in the relationship, because I want them to know that it may happen, and that I have witnessed mothers suffering because their children are now in a foster home, their children are suffering, and it takes at least 1 to 2 months to get the children back. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks. That's really good to know. Appreciate that.
Okay. Any other question?
People can write in the chat if they don't want to talk.
You're shy. So I also want to highlight, and again, this presentation is not about safety assessment, safety planning, but it matters to me to always bring these topics to your attention, because this is what I see all the time and what I hear from other service providers, that a lot of victims of domestic violence tend to minimize some of the what we call risk factors, and one is strangulation. And strangulation, we consider it a risk factor, and a lot of immigrant women, what they told me is, yeah, he tried to strangle me a couple of times, but then he didn't do harm to me, and it's okay. It's just because he was angry and he lost control. And what I explained to them is that we have had situations where the woman gets killed by the partner because when he's using strangulation as a form of control, it's not that in his mind he's thinking, oh, I'm going to kill her. Of course, he has this behavior where he gets angry and then he does the action of putting his hand in her neck and then starts putting pressure. So then, in the moment of his anger, he loses control of about how much pressure he's putting on her neck, and then some people die. And then when they go to court, he feels, of course, he is traumatized too, and I'm not justifying his violence, but his intention was not to kill her. His intention was about power and control, right? And using violence, but the intention was not to kill her. However, he ends killing her because of the pressure. So I explain this to women when they minimize strangulation as one of the risk factors, and I say, because she said, no, I feel safe. He's just doing that, but I don't think he will do harm to me, right? And then I explained to them that this is very harmful because it can impact her brain, it can impact her body, and ultimately it can kill her.
Elena, you have a couple of comments in the chat.
Yes. Uh-huh. Can you read them, please?
Yes, I said, thanks. Have you encountered a case of incest? Is one. And then the other comment is dental could be another cause for neglect with MCFD. I begin in contact with that while in transition house. No contact order has caused some clients to have children removed too.
Yeah. So about the incest, yes, we have a high percentage of people who experience intimate partner violence also have experienced some sexual abuse, sexual violence, including incest from their father. And that's something that I also bring to the attention of counselors here. I said, imagine that the person who was supposed to protect you and take care of you, the first man that you meet in your life is your father, who is violent and sexually abused you. So then what can you expect of other men, right? And we know that the majority of women who are victims of domestic violence have experienced some form of, whether it's sexual abuse from a father or witness their mothers being abused by their fathers, right? And then about the question of the transition house, I'm going to talk more about that in one of the slides I have. So again, when the woman is disclosing that she has children, it's important to ask her what are their names, what is their age, if they are living or not living with the mother, what is the immigration status, and what is the relationship to partner. And this sounds straightforward, and I imagine you have intake forms, but sometimes when I am supervising a support worker, and I asked, "Oh, I don't understand. Can you explain more? Are those children his children?" And yeah. Well, I think that one of them or two of them. And it's important to understand the whole relationship within the household, because that can help us to find the right legal information, and also about age. And that can help us to find the right transition house and the resources. Are there children living abroad? Is she applying to bring them to Canada? We have cases for refugee claimants that also they had to leave in a hurry just to because of safety issues, and they are planning to bring their children, and that is attached to the application with the partner. Does the abusive partner have the power to affect children, children's mobility from abroad? And again, what is the relationship? Is he the common law? Are they living together? Is she dating? Are they married? Are they separated? And again, these kind of questions and assessment sounds straightforward, but a lot of the times when I'm asking for that information to service providers who call us, or including people I supervise, sometimes they don't gather all that information, and it matters. It matters in how we proceed. So also, what is the history of gender-based violence? And the history of abuse in the current relationship. So is there isolation, right? Is he stopping her from going to work, from taking some training? Is there emotional abuse? Is there physical violence? Is there sexual abuse or violence? And what we have witnessed with the people who we support is that many self-identified women, we didn't have access to sexual education. Our bodies were always objectified. So there is also this confusion about what if this person is my partner or is my husband, then the way in which he wants to have sex with me, maybe I don't like it, maybe I feel uncomfortable, but it's my duty, right? And so with some of the survivors we support, it's very hard to identify sexual abuse as abuse, because there has been lack of sexual education, all the cultural beliefs and the pressure on women, bodies being objectified, and the expectation also that if it's your husband, you do whatever your husband wants. So we have these conversations with many women who are mothers and who have girls and boys, and they sometimes are perpetuating those beliefs, those oppressive ideas with their own children, not because they are abusive, but it's because they don't know, right? So it's important to have those conversations. We know that for many mothers, what keeps them in their relationship is the financial abuse and the control that usually the husband has over the children. And then intimidation and threats. So what are the threats, right? If you leave, I'm going to take the children away from you. We have many cases where even Canadian-born women come to us and they say, I'm so afraid to leave because he told me that if I leave, he's going to take the children away, and that the court is going to give the children to him because I don't have education or I don't have financial stability. So all those factors, we need to deconstruct those factors and to provide the support, because that can keep the, in this case, mothers in the relationship. So also it's important to talk again about cultural practices. And I find many service providers who tell me that, oh, but I need to be respectful of her culture, right? And if we talk about forced marriages or the mother-in-law being very controlling. So in some cultures, the mother-in-law who was a woman oppressed by men, now she puts herself in a position of authority, and then sometimes she can be more violent and more abusive towards the woman and her children than her partner, right? And I think that we need to have those conversations with the people we support, right? In a respectful way. I believe we need to deconstruct those ideas that it's her duty to follow specific norms, or that it's her duty to please the mother-in-law, or that she ended with that husband because her parents signed the documents when she was like underage, and now she's in Canada and she feels that he's very abusive and violent, but it's her duty to continue with him because her parents is what they expect of her. So I tend to deconstruct all those ideas, and it takes time, and I do it very softly, respectful. If the person doesn't want to go there, I don't push it, but I'm in a mission to deconstruct oppressive discourses that keep women in an abusive relationships and don't allow them to live with freedom, and don't allow their children to learn other ways that can be healthier and safer than the ways in which they have been taught during the time with the family. Before we go for a break, any questions, thoughts?
There were some comments on the chat.
Can you read them, Marilyn, please?
Jesus is not there. Okay, let me go back to look the chat. I think Carmen says there was a presentation training 2 weeks ago organized by REACH, Domestic Violence Prevention, precisely referring to strangulation, choking, and related to similar symptoms. See with the sport injuries, especially American football, and side effects that can be fatal down the road. Yes, and then the I guess it was called SOAR workshop. SOAR. And yeah, that's what I see. I don't know if Jesus sees any other message.
No. Okay, so it's 1:45. Can we come back at 2? So then you can have a 15-minute break to get your coffee and everything you need.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rosa. Thank you.
Join in again. Shall I wait for it now recording? Okay. Yes. So thank you for joining again and going back to supporting mothers who are dealing with domestic violence. Again, within the different safety planning and different training that people provide, and what we tell women is, oh, you should call the police. If you are at risk, call 911, right? And first of all, we need to remember that many survivors who access our services, they come from countries where the criminal system was another factor, a contributing factor towards violence against women, and that is a criminal system is controlled by men, is controlled by those cultural beliefs, and so a lot of people have been oppressed and criminalized in their own countries. So using the police is the last resort. And also, what we know and we see it is that sometimes we have survivors who call the police come, and if they don't have enough evidence, then they won't arrest the perpetrator. Sometimes they arrest someone who was very violent, and then he gets released within hours, right? And if he comes close to where the woman lives, and she calls the police sometimes they will say that they have bigger crimes than just coming right away. So what I want to say with this is not to discourage you from encouraging people to access what is available. In this case is the criminal system. So what we know is that physical violence, sexual violence, abuse towards children is considered a crime, and that within the criminal code, you know, like harassment, physical assault, all those behaviors are considered a crime, and she has the right to call the police and to engage in the criminal system to get a protection order. So it's important that we explain that to her, but also that we let her know that this system has some gaps, and yeah, we cannot promise to her that it's going to be perfect and that everything that she's supposed to get, she's going to get, right? And again, whether you support her throughout calling the police or you can refer her to us, so then we can explain to her the realities, the pros and cons of the criminal system. And also, sometimes when there are children involved, we let her know that she needs to let police know that, "Oh, I have my children here." So in that way, she's seen as more proactive, protecting her children. What we know is that the majority of women, they don't want to end with the relationship. What they want is the violence to stop, right? And sometimes they have this romantic idea, and maybe some of you have heard from people that they have this romantic idea that okay, I'm going to call the police. The police is going to come to my home and they are going to reprimand my husband. So he's going to learn his lesson and he's going to change, right? And sometimes that's what we hear, that sometimes they have that idea, and they want to use the criminal system in that way. Other time.
Sorry, there is a couple of comments, Rosalena. I don't think indigenous people trust RCMP. Another, I was just thinking this Sarah walk, and indigenous people are often scared to call the police. Yes, indigenous don't want to involve with the police. A very important distinction with DB cases as well is that police will typically always forward charges. On many cases, my team has supported victim survivors who thought they had a choice on whether to forward charge or not once they call the police. So it's important to understand the reporting process for your client to make the best decision on whether calling police is best for them.
Thank you for your comments, because all your comments are truth, and that's why we work from an intersectional approach, because we understand that, again, depending who you are within the structures of power, you are going to have different responses from police, right? And it's true about, we live in this colonized land where the legal systems were created by the colonizer. And in the beginning, what we know about the criminal system, mainly thinking about the RCMP, is that it was created to control indigenous people, right? Not to protect indigenous people or to protect victims of domestic violence. It was created to control people, right? So that's at the root of how these legal systems were created, and it's important to acknowledge that, because they are going to respond different depending who you are. And I have a case that I have shared before, is my kind of case study, because that case, this was a young racialized woman from Latin America who married a white old man who came to her country, and then he talked to the family. At that time, she was 17. He talked to the family and told them, "Oh, I want to marry your daughter." And then the family, who were poor, they were, "Oh yeah, wow, this white man wants to marry my daughter." And then they signed the documents. So then they got married, and then he brought her here to Canada, and then he became abusive. She got pregnant, she had one child, and there is the history of abuse that she went through. Then she got pregnant with the second child, and there were many incidents. Even there was one time that she called the police, and when the police came, the house was like clean, nothing had moved there. So then the police asked her if he had been abusive, and she said no, and then they left and didn't investigate further. So at some point, she kind of started understanding more English, and she learned a little bit about Canada. And she was not connected with a women's organization because at the time she just didn't have access to that information. So one day she decided to leave just on her own. She thought, I cannot take this anymore because he used to strangle her. Like there was physical abuse, financial abuse, and then she was concerned for her children. She didn't know about the child protection system, but as a mother, she was concerned for her children. So then she decided, I'm leaving. So she packed some stuff, and then she got her suitcase. She got to her two daughters, and when he saw her that she was leaving, he said, no, you are not leaving, and grabbed the suitcase. So then she got her cell phone and dialed 911. And the operator answered, do you want a police or ambulance? And then she said, police. And in that moment, her husband grabbed the phone from her. And then she took her two children and left the apartment and went outside of the building to wait for police to come. Because in that moment she thought, okay, I call 911 and then police is going to come to help me. While she was outside waiting, the operator was talking to the husband and said, oh, what's going on? And then he said, oh, my wife got angry and then she attacked me. And then the operator says, because I heard the conversation with the operator, and then she said, oh, did she use a weapon or what did she use? And he said, oh, yeah, she used a knife. And she said, well, does she have the knife? Go to the bathroom. The police is almost there. And then he pretended that he went to the bathroom. Then the police came and saw her outside the building. Her English was like basic English. So they didn't try to bring an interpreter or to talk more. But she was able to communicate, but they just assumed that she couldn't communicate. So then they went upstairs. So what her husband did, who knew about the criminal system and the law in Canada, what he did was to get the knife and cut a little bit his cheek. He made like a scratch in his cheek, so he had a little bit of blood. And then police came and he said, oh yeah, she assaulted me with a knife. So then what the police did was to arrest her. She got arrested. Her children were apprehended and she was put in jail 4 days. I never have seen like violent men being more than 24 hours, right? So she was in jail for 4 days. And when she was released, of course, she was not allowed to go to her apartment anymore because he was the owner of the apartment. So the people from the domestic violence unit were calling transition houses to get a space for the woman to go and stay there. And transition houses said, oh, no, we cannot take her because she's the perpetrator. So no one cared about exploring what is the story, asking her side of the story. So at some point when they couldn't find a place for her to go, they called me because the woman spoke Spanish. And then they called me and I said, just bring her to my office and I will find a place for her. So in having a conversation with her and she shared the story, I was like so angry that had happened to her. So I talked to the DVU, and then I tried to find a way for them to investigate again. I had to call transition houses and ask for people I know to give her a space, and then finally I found a space, and then I got her a lawyer, and after 2 months she got her children back. But then the police, through the DVU, they agreed to interrogate him again. And they started putting pressure on him, and he ended confessing that he had done the scratch on his face and that she hadn't assaulted him, right? But then by the time that then he confessed, she already had been punished by a system that was supposed to protect her, right? And after that, we decided to create a brochure to talk about women arrest, because then we became aware of many cases where the woman who is the victim doesn't want her husband to get arrested because she cares about her children, or she doesn't want him to lose his job, or it's her duty. She was taught as a woman, you keep the family together, and then she doesn't want to use the criminal system. But for many perpetrators, for many men who are abusive in the relationship, then when they don't see other option, they don't hesitate to make like a kind of false allegations, and then there is wrongful arrest. And I had after her, I had 4 cases that were similar, like where he made false allegations, and then I ended making a police complaint in those 4 cases, and I was successful because I use the criminal code, I use the VAWAR policies, violence against women in relationship policy, where the police didn't follow their own practices. They didn't follow their own procedures. And why? Because the systems we need to, and it's hard for me to say, but the system continues being racist and discriminates against women, right? And is going to be more obvious with racialized, indigenous, and Black women. Any comments, reactions?
There's one in the chat.
Yeah, you want to read, Miley?
Okay. From Carmen, and it is also the fact that many times the husband is the financial provider, so women think they won't be able to find the resources to provide for their families, and many times that is true.
Yeah, and thank you for your comment, Carmen. And that's why I said that this woman is my case study, because then I offered to provide counseling to her, and she was coming to, like, once that we were able to find like a transition house, and then she got her children back, because first she was crying all the time. The only thing she wanted was her children back, and everything happened to her because actually she wanted to leave because she didn't want her children to go through what she was going through. And through the conversations with her, that spiral of gender-based violence I showed you, she went through all of that. She had witnessed her mother being abused. She had been sexually abused by her father as a child. She shared with me that when she was in elementary school, one day when she was in grade 3, her father came to the school and said, you shouldn't be coming to school. So pull her out of school, and he burned all her books, and she was not allowed to go back to school. So then when she was 17, she was living with her parents, but she was just working in the sex economies, and it's how she ended meeting this man. So she felt that this man was going to save her, and that she was going to finally have a family, and she had that dream, right? And then when she was coming to counseling, she told me, I think that I should go back with him. And I was like, what? You know, I almost fainted after everything I have done for her, and understanding how bad was her situation. And so then we started exploring about her fears, and what she disclosed was that she was afraid that she was not going to be able to provide for her children, that she was always going to live from income assistance, and that maybe she needed to go back. And so then we worked on that. And so I said that you are super smart, and here in Canada is different. You can go back to school, doesn't matter how old you are. So through our work, I got her into the employment program at PWSS, and then she finished her grade 12. And through the employment program, we applied for a scholarship with Douglas College, and then she got as a office assistant kind of certificate. And so throughout the years, she kind of went through accessing counseling, just healing all the things that she needed to heal. And now she's the manager of a dentist office, and she supervised all the office assistant people in there, and she's making more money than maybe I'm making. So, and this is a story of like 5 years ago, right? But it's like huge, right? When she, in the beginning, she was saying that she wanted to go back, right? And the only reason why she didn't go back is because caring about her children, right? Because she had two girls. And I remember telling her one time, I thought that you were going to break the cycle of violence. So then your daughters don't have to be the ones going through the cycle of violence to break it. But if you want to go back, it's your choice. And it's going to be for your daughters to do that work. And she just looked at me in shock and she said, no, 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 I don't want them to go through what I have been through. So she never went back. But this goes with what I want to say, that when we support victims of domestic violence, we need to understand and be ready for them to, maybe after everything we do for them, they want to stay, or they want to leave, or they want to return, right? And before, when I started this work like 25 years ago, research indicated that it takes 7 times for a woman to go back and forward until she leaves for good. But working here at BWSS, I have been like keeping track of how many times it takes for the people who access our services, and it doesn't take more than 2 times. And the reason is because they have access to many programs within our organization, and also because we work from a perspective that we are not going to stigmatize them or judge them or to stop providing services because they went back, right? Still, if they go back to their relationship, it's always important to ask them if they have a safety plan, even when they decide to be there. So remind the person, so if leaving, remind the person not to share her plan with her children. This is key. Always remember to tell the mother not to share her plan with her children, even if they are teenagers. And I usually tell stories, so and some of the stories can be hard because the work, we're talking about domestic violence, and there was a case in Surrey where the woman had a 14-year-old and 18-year-old son. Maybe Marilyn knows this story because it was in the media years ago. And again, she was not connected with a women's organization. She just decided that she wanted to leave her partner. He was not the father of her children. He was a stepfather, and then her 18-year-old son helped her to find an apartment. They had a whole plan to go and live into that apartment. So then her 14-year-old son used to play video games with the stepfather, and he was kind of close to the stepfather, even though he was abusive towards the mother. And then the woman and her older son told the 14-year-old son that they had an apartment, and in 1 week we are going to leave. Don't say anything to John. And then the son was playing games with the stepfather, and then told him, oh, I know that my mom and my brother want to move out and they already have an apartment, but when they move out, can I still come and play with you video games? And he's a young boy. He needed a father figure, maybe. He got connected with his stepfather. So he ended disclosing.
I don't know what is that, but then like
Thank you. He ended the. Sorry, someone wants to talk?
No, that's okay. Somebody had
okay. So the young boy didn't know better, right? But then the stepfather, who didn't have a history of violent person, there was nothing on the records of a criminal background. He went and got a gun, and then he came home and beat up the woman she got disabled. She's alive, but she became disabled. But he killed the 2 children as a revenge. And he's in jail, and hopefully he's there forever. But and we, like women's organizations, went to court when that happened because we wanted him to stay in jail forever. So I usually share this story because I know that when I share this story, you are not going to forget to tell the people you support that if they are planning to leave, even if they have teenager children, not to say anything. That she works with her worker, she has the plan, and she just tell them, oh, can you go with me? I'm going to the mall, or whatever lie she can tell. And then once that she's in the shelter or in the transition house is when she talks to them about why she has left, but that she doesn't share anything until she is in a safe place, because again, teenagers, children, young children can disclose information that can jeopardize their safety. And the other thing is that legally, based in family law, when he's the father of the children, and let's say that he's violent, and many women think it's better if I live on my own, so then my children don't have to suffer to go to a shelter or transition house. They don't have to change the school, and I don't want to traumatize them. So it's better if I go to the shelter and then later I come back to get my children. And then when she wants to get them, police is not going to help her because she doesn't have a family court order. And for a lot of people, in this case, fathers who are abusive and want to control the woman through the children, they go to court and they ask for it's called parenting time. And he may get a higher percentage of parenting time because the children are living with him. And then when the woman comes to see us, and she's like, oh, my children are young, they need me, and he's not allowing me to see them. I only can see them once a week or twice a week. And then we go to court, and she makes a point about he was violent towards the children, violent toward me. That's why I left. And then I went back to get them once that I was safe. And the judge is going to say, okay, so if he was that bad, why did you leave your children with him? Whether you neglected them and put them at risk by leaving them there, or he's not that violent, that you came back after a week, right? So I tell these stories to survivors I support, just for them to understand, that the system is complex, and also there are risk factors that they need to take in consideration.
Before you go, there's one more comment from Carmen after what she has said before. She says, and it doesn't stop there. The court system is next, like when women start the process, and unfortunately, the court system sometimes is being used against them too.
Exactly. And like some years ago, we were able to include into the Family Law Act domestic violence and kind of violence against mothers as a factor that judges needed to consider. But still, in Canada, and what I tell women is, in Canada, the Family Law Act says that the father and the mother have the same right to have access to their children. So even if you disclose that he was abusive towards you, that won't change the decision, right? Because the father and the mother have the same right to have access to their children. The only way to limit the access or to get more access is if you are able to demonstrate that the father was abusive towards the children, right? And in the case of the woman I told you that she got arrested, what we did was to use the fact that he had strangled the woman before, and that he caught his cheek to make up something, false allegations. and we were successful. And then we accessed the MCFD and we accessed the family law to make a case, and then and also the criminal system, and all of them agree that he shouldn't have access to the children. But that's one case once in a blue moon, right? That we were successful. Otherwise, it's very hard to make a case. So when we think about the safety plan, if the mother is leaving, again, mothers can teach their children some basic safety planning. It is based on the belief that the most important thing that the children can do for their mothers and their families is to get away from the area of violence. So, of course, many of the mothers who access our support, they already know about child protection, so they don't disclose to us if their children are being like abused by the father or witnessing violence. If they know that that's happening, they may not disclose it because they already have heard that we are required to disclose that if a child is not safe. So then I don't push that they have to tell me, but if I get some, my intuition tells me that something is going on, then I said, okay, so you are telling me that this violence is not happening, that your children are okay. But in case that there is violence, it's important that you teach your children to call 911, that you tell them that if something were to happen, that the father gets angry, to go into a room, and that the priority is that they are safe. Can you teach that to your children, right?
A couple of comments. One is from Amira Roth. I know that there is a project in the works through federal government for recommendations to take intimate partner violence into account with custody issues to be written into the act. It is a few years out, but a woman I know who is a lawyer shared that her colleagues was recruited for this. And the second one for Madeline, this is the criminal system is so difficult as well because they deal with only one assault at once. So often there is so much history that gets lost because they're not allowed to bring it up. It can make people feel like the judge doesn't get the full picture. It's difficult, but being upfront about what the process looks like can help people on what to expect. And that's it.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your comments. So again, what we have seen is that when there is violence at home, the majority of children try to interfere, right? And the majority of them have done it multiple times, or if it's the first time, they will try to interfere. So also we have conversations with mothers about maybe it's not your situation, but what we have learned is that children try to interfere. So again, it's important that you teach your child that the most important thing for you is that they are safe, and that you don't want them to interfere, or if they are going to interfere, that the only thing they can do is to call 911 or to call a neighbor or someone who can come and support you. So we had a case where the son is the one who ended calling 911. And what the woman told me is, in the moment I was in shock that my son ended calling 911 and police came. And she said, but if my son hadn't done that, maybe I will continue there, because it was until that moment that I became aware of the level of violence and how huge it was that my son, even though this man was or is his father, still he went ahead and called the police, right? And I told my son that because of his actions, I was not going to go back ever again to that situation, and that he didn't deserve to witness that violence. But it took her, like, the son was 12 years old when he called the police, right? And the child had been witnessing abuse and violence until the child couldn't take it anymore. And of course, we don't want children to be responsible for that, but in many of cases that come to my attention, also have been like children, usually 8 years or older, the ones who went calling the police.
There's some more comments. Jesus, are you there? Or maybe not. Okay, I'll read it to you.
Yeah.
So Christine says, okay.
There is a
Okay, go ahead.
trend.
Yes.
There is a trend these days for catch and release for criminal these days.
Yes.
Currently, currently there's a repeat offender pedophile who disappeared from his halfway house. Why is he even in a halfway house? Sorry, type of trend these days. Okay, those are the comments.
Yeah, so thank you for your comments, and feel free to write as many comments because we need to put it out, right? And I have seen, like, this is the work we do here, and we engage a lot with the criminal system. And yeah, pedophiles are released. We have had perpetrators who are very violent, and they not only are released, maybe if they get jail time is 1 month if we are lucky, and then they are released, and the protection order allows them to continue going back to the area where the victim lives, right? So yeah, it's very hard. It's very hard because this criminal system is what we have as the last resort for survivors to call, but still the response is not very thorough to what, or sometimes even it feels like punishing the victim instead of providing justice to the victim. So safety plan if there are children living at home. Is there a safe room inside your house? Whenever possible, mother should make a safety plan for her children to go to a safe room as soon as violence arises. Is there a safe place outside of the house? So we have had also situations where the children escape and then they go and talk to the neighbors, and the neighbors are the ones who call the police. And again, there is not the best way to do it, but what we have heard from survivors is that in a way they were grateful that the neighbors were the ones who ended calling the police, because then she's not seen by the abuser and his family as the one who put him in jail or the one who got him charged. So, and going back to supporting our clients towards strengthening their self-determination so they can empower themselves and seek safety for themselves and their families. Again, I know many of you who are here, that's what you do and you know how to do it. So this is just to ensure that you familiarize yourself with resources for mothers who have experienced abuse or violence in your area, that you listen to the woman's needs and concerns, you gather basic information about her situation, and again, do not let culture to excuse violence in intimate relationships, and explore with them what they need now and provide the appropriate resources, respect their confidentiality, and when I said respect their confidentiality, also because sometimes you are working with the whole family, right? And it's important to understand that anything you disclose to one of the parties can jeopardize their safety. Validate what they have already done to keep themselves and their children safe. Because again, we women who, for some of you who are mothers, you can understand how we have so much pressure in society about being a good mother and this idea of the good mother. So we already carry a lot of guilt and shame, right? And maybe you are the first person who is validating how much she has done and everything that she has done to keep herself safe, even when in your standards she hasn't done enough. We need to really take in consideration the context of her life, her living conditions, and everybody's trying to make an effort, right? And I believe that the majority of mothers care about their children, and the majority of mothers have hurt their children indirectly. So assess and provide safety plan. You have a comment, Marilyn?
Yes. But if Jesus is there,
Yeah, Carmen
Yeah.
says, I think the system fails the most vulnerable. From the moment a woman going back to immigrant and families gets sponsored by Canadian partner, it's doomed to unbalance the scale, whether there are resources for them other than BWSS to empower them and make them feel safe. When the whole system has already failed them, as you said, Rosa, this kind of info doesn't get out often in the mainstream media. We get no from Facebook, and again, it's noisy where I am, so I can, and that's it.
Okay, thank you, Carmen, for your comments. Yeah, and it's true. Like we need to make more visible the different barriers that the people face and how the system. I try to do that, right? Because again, we tend to, in this neoliberal world, we tend to individualize problems, and then we tend to think that the problem again is the person, when the person is trying to survive in many ways, right? And I think when I think about domestic violence, I think that if governments and systems were to do their work about providing equality, equity, justice, then we could end violence against women. We could end domestic violence sooner than later because we could use the educational system. Like there are many systems that can be used to change this. And I always wonder who benefits from this issue to continue, right? So, and again, we need to ensure that people understand their rights and responsibilities. Even for some of you who work with men, I think that it's important to let them know, and for immigrant men, for example, right, that in Canada, violence against women is considered a crime and how the criminal system works. And the same for victims, right? They may or may not use the police, but they have the right to call the police and to be treated with respect. They have the right to have an interpreter. So it's important to share that information. As you know, information is power. Ensure that they have access to an interpreter if they do not speak English. Acknowledge that they may not understand the Canadian legal system, even when you have explained it. And I work with people who were born in Canada, grew up in Canada, and when they have to face a criminal system or child protection or family law system, and we explain how the system works, still they don't understand that because it's the first time that they are facing these problems. And so just be patient and understand that you have to explain over and over, because I see when I go with, and maybe this is familiar to some of you, that when you go to see a lawyer because you are supporting a survivor, then the survivor is treated as they are not smart enough, or or when we go to see the Crown Consul, sometimes the Crown, I have witnessed many cases right now at BWSS. We are writing about this and we are going to expose this because we have seen many cases where the Crown is convincing the victim to agree to a peace bond. And the peace bond is not the same that a protection order, right? And I'm not going to get into teaching the protection orders, but the peace bond, the person doesn't get charged. It lasts just for a period of time. And sometimes if you call the police, if they hardly take serious a protection order, peace bond, sometimes they don't take it serious, right? So it's important that people understand the difference within protection orders, and that even though the Crown is supposed to be representing the people and ensuring that they are addressing that a crime is committed, sometimes they are the ones convincing the victim not to pursue with charges, right?
There is another comment from Sarah. It says, just a side note, under the SOGI program in school, sexual orientation and gender identification, which causes sexual confusion in child and youth, child pornography is shown to child. This violates Criminal Code Section 163. Police officer is informed but asked the public to contact youth program coordinator. No case was opened. Pornography plays a large part in sexual violence.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, thank you for highlighting that information. That's why I appreciate that all of you are writing your comments, because there is so much knowledge here. So thank you for that. So whenever possible, support the mother to find resources for her children too, because also what I have seen is that sometimes, of course, we want to put the mother at the center because she's the one who is dealing with all these systems and all these issues, but then the children get forgotten, and they also are in need of counseling or to have a conversation. When we think about the impact of trauma, so the traumatic situation does a lot of harm to humans, but what it has been shown in research is that is more harmless the isolation, right? So if the child has faced a traumatic situation and the only person to talk to is the mother, sometimes the child is going to feel that he or she or they are protecting the mother, and then it's better not to say anything, is don't talk, don't, or then they start acting out and showing a behavior that maybe they get violent or towards the mother, and then the mother is trying to reprimand them because she doesn't know better. So it's very important to have those conversations about how children are impacted by what has happened. And of course, the mother has a huge power to support her children, but she's also going through her own trauma, maybe as a child, going through the impact of domestic violence, living the consequences of living an abusive relationship, and then having to support her children is a lot. It's a lot that we put on women. So it's important to let the mother know that there can be resources where the child can talk to a counselor or a support group, or for children who witness abuse in family services, they have those programs, right? And I know in other community centers there are programs for children, but it's important to understand that we shouldn't isolate the children. So let me see, there is a mistake there in the middle class. So women are the experts of their own experience and their healing journey. Violence against women is the result of systemic oppression. Mothers are doing their best with what they have. And again, we put a lot of pressure on mothers to perform once that they leave. And we need to understand that there is impact of trauma, and that maybe now that she is free and that there is no abuse, that she's not experiencing abuse from her husband, then she doesn't have to survive in the way that she was surviving when she was experiencing abuse. So then that's why maybe now she's crying more or feeling depressed, and so all those feelings and emotions we need to validate, and we need to provide the support for her to continue. So I wanted to share information about shelters because, again, that's what we do with people who are in the process of leaving, and many of them don't have the right information. So a lot of service providers think that shelter and transition house is the same, and it's not the same. So there are shelters for families where the woman can come with her children and her husband, right? Let's say like they are refugee claimants. So it's for people who don't have a place to live. It's not necessary for people who are escaping from violence. There are shelters that is for single men, single women, shelters for women who are single or have children. Some shelters do not accept women with precarious immigration status. So make sure that if you are referring a person to a shelter, you understand and familiarize yourself with their criteria. Some shelters do not accept people who are actively using substances, and other shelters have a harm reduction approach, and then they agree to accept people who are using substances. And people can stay there for 30 days. And some shelters have support workers, and other shelters don't have support workers. So if people need resources, support, or information, then they have to access other organizations. So transition houses are for women who are escaping violence, who are escaping domestic violence. So the majority of transition houses prefer to have families, and what they call the family is the woman with her children. In many shelters, they don't accept boys who are over 15 years old. So and that is a factor that sometimes stops the woman from leaving, because maybe her boy is over 15 years old, or he looks like a man. Some shelters, I had a shelter where they didn't want to accept the boy because he was tall and he looked like a man, and they thought that was intimidating for other women in the transition house, so it was really hard. Sometimes what we do when they have boys who are over 15, we let the person know that maybe just for 30 days, the boy can go to a shelter, and then she can go to the transition house. And once that she has a permanent housing, they can live together again. And many mothers don't want to do that. But for the ones who have decided that they want to leave the abusive relationship, then that can be an option. There are some shelters that they accept single women, but it's really hard, right? Because shelters are going to prioritize families. So when the woman doesn't have children, sometimes it's very hard to make a case. Some transition houses do not accept women with precarious immigration status. And a lot of the times in many transition houses, I have to beg them to accept the person who doesn't have a immigration status. And what I say is, if after 30 days she doesn't have a place to go, you can send her back to my office, and I will help her to find permanent housing or another temporary housing. But please don't let her stay in an abusive relationship when she is making this decision. So it's important that we support her during this time. So sometimes it's how I convince transition houses, but it's really hard. And there are other, for example, the YWCA, they have a program for mothers without a status. So if the woman has children, regardless of her immigration status, they accept survivors who need to access temporary housing. Some transition houses, if the woman is escaping intimate partner violence, but she's also engaged in sex economies, they won't accept her. And when they do their intake, they ask those kind of questions. There is a shelter, and I didn't want to go into names or areas because I don't want to expose shelters, but there is a shelter that they don't accept trans people. So if the person identifies as a trans or trans woman, they won't be accepted to move there, right? Or even in that same shelter, if the person is escaping from same-sex abuse, and maybe the woman identifies as a lesbian or gay or gender diverse person, they won't accept her in that specific transition house.
A couple of comments. One is from Marilyn. It says Vancouver Multicultural Family Support Services also offers support for children, and she gave the phone number. And Sarah wrote, I'm not sure about the specific case you are referring to where pornography was shown in the schools as part of the SOGI curriculum. What I can speak on is that the fact that teaching children about a variety of sexual orientations and identities help with the anti-LGBT bullying in schools, which help reduce depression and suicidal tendencies in youth. SOGI is not about, Omar says, SOGI is not about showing child pornography to children, and there is a link. And from Amira, sexual orientation and sex are very different things. Paulette, taking a family apart after a traumatic experiences sounds very harsh. And Julie, do you know shelters accepting women in a precarious immigration status? And Paulette, I meant separating them from shelter. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, so there are some like Belkim House, they have accepted people with precarious immigration status. But usually I have to call and really have conversations with workers for them to make a space. It's not just straightforward. And thanks for talking about gender diversity, LGBTQ two-spirit people, because a lot of children are also going through understanding what is their gender identity, the one they identify with, and sometimes that's another factor for pressure, right? And I have had cases where the mother knows that the child is going through this exploring or finding out more about what they identify as their gender identity, and they don't want to disclose that to the father because it's mainly the father who is going to act on discriminate or oppress the child because of that, right? So I think those are conversations that need to happen. And again, if you are supporting a survivor, a mother, and she discloses that, those are conversations that we should be open to have, because sometimes what I tell my counselors, I teach narrative therapy, and we talk about the oppressive ideas that create problems in society, right? And I tell my counselors, if you haven't deconstructed your own oppressive ideas, it's very hard to support others because then you are biased and you are going to impose those ideas. So it's important that we, familiarize with different areas of our work and the different possibilities that can come up that can help us to support someone in the right way. So transition houses, some of them have counselors or support workers who work with the children, which is good. They have support workers who support the women and their families to find, like to submit applications for BC housing, to help them to access the computer so then they can look for permanent housing. They have programming, maybe support groups. They have help with transportation. And again, some transition houses agree to support mothers without a status, and it's also a 30-day stay. Then
Marilyn makes a comment about rape relief. Monroe House, Monarch House accepts non-status.
Okay, thank you, Marilyn. Then the second stage housing accept children, immigrant and refugee women with precarious status. Some second stage housing like Monroe House, they accept mothers without a status. And for the second stage housing, women who have been in a transition house and who are at risk, who have children and who are at risk of more violence by the former husband, are the ones who are accepted. So they kind of do an intake, and then they measure the different factors that can be barriers for the woman and risk factors. And based on those factors, they determine if the person is eligible to live in a second stage housing. And I find that very helpful when women get into second stage housing, because then they can live there for a year and they have access to employment programs, support for their children, and they have access to other resources. So what a mother needs to know about a transition house, there are different kinds of transition houses, so I suggest that you familiarize with them. You can go to our website. At the end, I give some resources, and you can go to our website and look for shelters or transition houses in all over Canada. So we have a description of the shelters, and it's a very good resource that you can access. Survivors need to do an intake before getting in. So sometimes we, as workers, what I have heard from service providers is they tell the person, call 911 and go to a shelter, right? But then we don't provide the full thorough information. That's what I'm trying to provide today, to encourage you to get familiar with the different resources, with safety planning, with the different criterias, because the more you know, the better that you can support a mother with children. So the majority of women who want to escape from violence, they need to do an intake. So it's not that they just call the transition house and the transition house worker said yes. So then they ask many questions. So survivors have told me that it was very hard for them to answer all those questions, and that it felt very intrusive. And I agree with them, but also that's the procedure that the transition house has, right? So they will ask, do you use any drugs? Do you drink alcohol? What is the name of your husband? Where do you live? Has he been charged before? How many children? What is the name of your children? So they do a thorough intake. So you need to prepare the survivor to answer that intake for her to have access to the transition house. So a lot of the times when they come to my office, then we sit with them, we put them on the phone, and then we just sit close to them in case that they need some support. They will not keep the space for whenever the survivor is ready to leave, right? Because sometimes in this case, many women call, do the intake, and then once that the worker says, okay, yeah, you are accepted, so can you come now? And the woman is like, no, I'm not ready. Can I go tomorrow? Or can you give me 2 days? And so I need to explain to women when they are learning about safety plan, about leaving an abusive relationship, all the steps they need to take. So what I let them know is, if you are going to call a transition house and go through an intake, you have to be ready to leave on that day. I wish they could give more time, because I understand all the pressure that it means. If we think about, oh, you have to leave your home right now, if I tell you, it's not safe, you have to leave right now, it's just a lot of stress. I don't know, for me it will be hard to leave my home right now, right? I have so many pending things there. It's just so hard. So I understand that. I totally empathize with them that they should be given when they need. It's not that if they are in a hurry, they just leave, right? But if they have time to plan, that they should be given time. But unfortunately, they are not given enough time, right? So residents are not allowed to bring many suitcases or bags with the stuff. So, and for many immigrant women, that happens, right? That then when they are told, yeah, you can come, then they want to take long time packing, and they want to bring their CDs, they want to bring ornaments and all their clothing. And once that they get into the transition house, they are not accepted with all the stuff there. So you need to let them know that they can bring their basic like documents, clothing, the basic information for their children, clothing, and that later they can go to pick up more things, but that's all they are allowed to bring. So transition house workers can arrange for police to go with the survivor to her home and pick up her stuff to keep the peace. So when they bring the police, is sometimes women don't want, they said, oh no, but I don't want my husband to see that I am coming with the police, and I don't want him to get charged. And so we need to explain that the police comes only to keep the peace. And so what they do is that they ask the husband the partner to go into a different bedroom or outside of the house, and then she can pick up more clothing or documents that she left. And once that she finished picking up everything, then they bring her back to the transition house. But also the woman needs to know that she cannot bring other property like, let's say, a TV or a piece of furniture, because for that she needs a family law court order, because that is considered property that maybe they share. Survivors do not need to bring their own food. That's another question I get asked about. Oh, I am a vegetarian, or I come from a country where I'm used to eat these specific things. So many transition houses are going to be open to provide the food that the person is used to eat or needs to eat. So they don't need to bring money for food or to bring their own food. Transition houses are free, because sometimes people forget that they don't need to pay. However, many of them require that the person is on income assistance, right? Staying in a transition house doesn't mean that the survivor and her children will have immediate access to permanent housing. And we need to be honest with the people we support, because in Vancouver right now, in British Columbia, there is a housing crisis. And as you know, trying to find permanent housing for a family who is a low-income family is very hard. And again, depending the social location, sometimes landlords, if the woman discloses that she's on income assistance, they don't want to have or if she's single, there, like, still we find many people who discriminate against women and their children based on their social location and their income. So we need to be honest with them that they may not find, because they think that maybe because they are in the transition house, automatically they are going to be able to get into a permanent housing opportunity, but it is required for her to submit many applications, to maybe connecting with a housing advocate, to negotiate sometimes with landlords, to look for many resources until she finds the permanent housing. And she's given only 30 days for that when she's in a transition house, right? So while she's also taking care of her children and dealing with her own impact of trauma. So it's very hard. So I have a group exercise. Let me see, what time is it? So it's 3 o'clock, so that's good. So if you can, before you do the breakout groups, I'm thinking 4 people. And if you need one with 5, then we do that, but 4 people in each group. And this is the case scenario. So Jane has 2 children. One is 6 years old and the other one is 14 years old. Last night, the 14-year-old boy called the police because his father got violent towards his mom. Today, Jane comes to talk to you and shares that she wants to go back with her husband because she fears not having a stable home for her children. She always has been a housewife, and besides, her children need a father. So the children need a father is something that we hear all the time, right? So questions for you to explore. And how do you provide empathy to Jane? So the first step is Jane wants to go back for all those reasons. And of course, we react to her being honest. I react to her wanted to go back, right? However, I'm supposed to provide empathy. So how do you imagine providing empathy? What kind of things can you tell Jane from an empathetic place? What kind of information about child protection do you provide to Jane? How do you deconstruct the oppressive idea about children need a father, even when the father is abusive? What kind of resources can you provide to Jane? So let me just write these questions here on the. Let me stop sharing.
How long do you want the groups?
So if we can do, it's 3 o'clock, 20 minutes? Or what do you think? Hold on a sec.
That's good.
20 minutes. Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Okay. Right now?
Yeah. So I'm going to copy the questions and paste those questions in the chat. Hold on a sec.
Do I go to one?
¿Quieres ir a un grupo, Marilyn?
Vas a salir. It's okay. If you have everybody perfect, I can stay out. If you need somebody in a group.
No, parece que están todos bien.
Okay, so let me paste the questions here. So, because I think, creo que todos pueden ver el chat, ¿verdad?
Yes.
I think so, yeah.
Okay, so. Okay, perfect. ¿Qué tal? ¿Cómo van viendo?
Is that okay? Are they all gone? I don't know. We can have our own group.
Sí. Mientras estoy hablando, recibí un montón de mensajes de que que le cortaron la luz a mi papá,
Oh
que
my.
qué hacían. Entonces, mientras estoy hablando, me fui a una app que tengo, pero no pude pagar con el app, entonces tuve que mandar a la muchacha que está cuidando a mi papá que se fuera en un Uber y que pagara y que me prestara dinero.
You're
This is my
superwoman.
life. This is my life.
Ay, 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 ay. I'm sorry,
No.
Rosa. Qué terrible lo de tu papi.
Sí, es demasiado, es como tener dos trabajos, pero urgentes, ¿no? Todo es urgente.
Ay, 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 es tan difícil. Por suerte que pudiste, no estás taping, right? ¿Estás grabando, Jesús? Is it recording?
Sí.
You're gonna have to cut this.
Sí.
This.
No.
Okay. So thanks for having a conversation with each other. Anyone who wants to share what your group came up with? Don't be shy. We want to hear from you.
I can start.
Okay.
I took notes. So there was a lively conversation, and we did like rounds. What would you do? And everybody. I'm just going to read what I have. Yeah. Do you want me to say names or just the whole? I'll just read
the whole conversation about brainstorming ideas.
Yes. So definitely at beginning listening to the woman in terms of the empathy, then acknowledge the very important situation that she's facing at the moment, and for her and the kids, validating her how she feels, and also the consequences of what this is happening, because the kind of the ministry is might be involved, and at the same time that she's free to choose and to decide, to remind her of that, and that talking about the father, about is that the kind of role model that she wants for the children, and also that already the reality of the system is not favorable, and is reminding her this is not your fault. And perhaps you might be attached to him, but also reminding her that she also matters, that she's important, and also very important for the children's, as that she be okay. And those are kind of the just notes that I took. Yeah, we moved to, and we didn't go to resources. with the untouched resources. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Marilyn. Anyone from Marilyn's group who wants to add anything that she may be missing?
I'm sure I'm missing.
Okay.
We were
Carmen?
talking, yeah, just gonna say quickly, I think Marilyn mentioned it already, but I personally, I was kind of triggered or intrigued about how to deconstruct the situation with the male figure at home, no, considering that he's abusive. And that I was kind of saying how can we bring that to her? How impacted she was about the fact that the 14 years old called the police. And then we were talking about whether the ministry or wherever the child protection was already there, like Ruth was saying, you know, what the ministry is already involved because the police showed up, right?
Yeah.
But I think for me it's because I'm still trying to see how I mean, for me, I'm kind of slow with them. It's always like trying to see how impacted she was by that, by the fact that the 14 years old had to call the police and she didn't call the police. That was it for me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, that's a really good point. And again, when I ask these questions about how do you deconstruct this idea that children need a father, like there is in a heterosexual hierarchy, there is this idea that you only can be a family if there is a male figure, right? It's those kind of ideas that were imposed on that on us, and this idea that kind of the mother without a husband is weak. And so first I need to think about all the ideas that have been put on our head based on gender roles, you know, and gender expectations. That's one thing that we as service providers, we need to deconstruct and revisit. And of course, children need loving parents, whether it's the mother and the father or two parents or two women, two men, like whoever is their family, whoever are their caregivers, they need loving people. You know? So it's about love, and so they need loving people. So how can we have a conversation with the woman in that moment when she's not saying my child needs a loving person. She's saying my child needs a father. Doesn't matter if he's abusive or a jerk or whatever it is. It's because what she's saying is what she was told for many generations. So any ideas about what can you say or ask to help her to change that?
From other groups, right? Because in our group, it was asking if that was the role model that she wanted for her children. But I'm sure the other groups.
Yeah, so that's one question, right? Like, what kind of father would you like for your children? If you could imagine, if you could be free of choosing what kind of father you would like for your children, can you give me a description? Because that's a way to start exploring and deconstruct something that she learned, right? And to give her a chance to start imagining a different way, right? So someone else who wants to share? And the other thing is that, again, if we think about gender identity and gender expectation as women, like to support her in exploring what are her strengths, right? To say, let's say that if we don't want to challenge the father idea, then instead of going there, then we can go to her and look at her and make her visible and help her to stand in her own power and say, at this time that you are going to be in charge of your family, and at this time, your family are your two children. So at this time, what do you think you can provide to them? What are your strengths? You know, what kind of things you know, what kind of values you have, what kind of dreams you have. that can contribute to the life of your children. Because of course the first thought is, oh, he's a jerk, don't go back, right? He's violent, but I think that people need, and what some people have told me, this is the first time that someone is asking me that question. This is the first time that I think of that. I never thought of myself as someone who could have the strengths and values that can provide to my child, right?
Rosa, another way of asking too is could be asking the mom what kind of husband does she want her sons to be?
Exactly, right? In the cycle of violence, right? What kind of husband, what kind of father you would like your son
Yes.
to be, right? And then even to use the action of the 14-year-old to say, what do you think your 14-year-old boy wants for you that made him call the police, even though this man is his father? We need to make visible the 14-year-old and the strength, because what we know, it takes a lot of courage to leave an abusive relationship. It takes a lot of courage for children, because as children, we all have a dream that our parents are going to get better, right? That one day they are going to love us and change. So the majority of people who were children living in a situation where there was abuse and violence, they always had this dream that my parents one day are going to change and love me, right? So it's hard to give up. So for a 14-year-old to use the criminal system to stop the violence is huge, right? And then we need to validate that he took that action because he wants safety and love for his mother, right? So maybe he also wants safety for himself, and love. And do you think that the behavior of his father is showing safety and love, right? And we need to have those conversations from a place where it takes time to change. We have been brainwashed completely to believe certain things, and also society reinforces those ideas about the single mom and the family together and the father and what we consider a family. Any questions, any thoughts about that?
Let me think. Mm-hmm. I had something in my mind, but it left.
No.
There is a comment from Christine. It's another way of looking at it from a different mindset. When folks are wavering about separation, living, is what if the partner is dead, gone suddenly in a traffic accident? She'd still be alone. The woman would still have the strength. Think of how she should walk on her own without a partner.
Exactly.
She
Yeah.
wants a partner.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I remember.
What do you remember?
About the 14-year-old that in our group we were talking. Somebody brought up the how would how would it be for the mom to know that the 14-year-old was the one that called and not her, like in a way that she didn't do it, right? And the child is kind of being the parent. I think that's what I understood that, and yeah, we had a little bit of a discussion about that. Is Rosa? I think Rosa disappeared. Oh yeah, Rosa's there.
Maria has her hand up.
Yeah, Maria?
Yes. Yeah, in our experience, what happens is, like a young man, a teenager, he's doing this. It's instinctive to protect one's family, to protect one's mother, to protect oneself, but at some point he will feel guilty and he will begin to judge himself. So as you were saying, it is good to have that conversation, not to blame him, not to judge him, to sort of validate his action, and then in the process you can find out, as was suggested earlier, what was the impetus, what made him call 911. And also, just an example, just yesterday, I had a client. Um, it's easy to say, yeah, my children have become like my father. In a lot of cases,
Yeah.
children do follow what they see, and she's been having somewhat of a obedience issue with the son. But when she confronted her husband, this is one woman who doesn't seem to understand she's in an abusive relationship. And so she keeps nagging and pushing. And of course, she gets hit, she gets lambasted, she gets insulted. Um, and just yesterday, what she was saying was she was trying to get the young man to go to sleep because today is a school day. And of course, dad always derails her, always throws her under the
Mm-hmm.
bus and makes her look like she's the monster. And her tactic is to argue. And it's not right. You're going to go to school. What is going to happen to you? So her son actually took her arm, her hand, and she said it felt like he was twisting it, but he was leading her to the stairs. And so what came to mind was, yes, in her first reaction is, yes, he's become like his father, a violent person, or becoming a violent person. But I said, think about this. Maybe it's his own way of trying to protect you. Because if you
Yeah.
stay downstairs and started to nag again, you might get again his fist on your face. And this boy is very difficult. He's trying to defend his mom. He's also trying not to become, how would I call this? Look like he's become his father. And a 14-year-old boy, I think this is a lot of burden, a lot of responsibility. He will need help. That's definite.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that based on research, what we have seen when we think about domestic violence within heterosexual families is that children tend to align with the one with the power, and that is a survival mechanism, right? Is just
Absolutely.
because we depend, like we are children, we depend on these adults, and then they are fighting, so the mother is weak and the father is strong. So if I want to survive, it's like a reptilian brain, the survival kicks in, and it's just, if I need to survive, I need to align with the one with the power. So a lot of children will take the side of the father, but it's a way to protect themselves. So for this boy, 14-year-old boy, to just go ahead and call the police, it took a lot. And then in this case, the father later on, he went to family court, and he wanted to have access to the 14-year-old and the 6-year-old brother. And then the woman told the judge, my son doesn't want to see him. He's scared of him. And the judge first didn't believe, and he said, well, he's not that scared because he's the one who ended up calling the police. And she said, yeah, but my son says that he's scared of him. So then the judge agreed to interview the 14-year-old boy, and also he interviewed the 6-year-old boy, but the 14-year-old boy was the one that gave like his statement to the judge. And then after he interviewed the 14-year-old boy, the judge decided that he was not going to give access to the father. And when I was in court and the father was there, and when the father was fighting that, oh yeah, he has been manipulated by my ex-wife, that's why he's saying that. And the judge said, I have interviewed many children, and your son is really traumatized by you, and he is fearful of you, and I'm not going to ask him to suffer further. He already has suffered enough, so you won't have access, right? Which is huge in all the cases I have seen. But yeah, imagine like the strength that this boy has, that even though survival sometimes tell us to align with the one with the power, still he went against that one with the power. So yeah. Any other comments, questions?
Can I just say that nothing justifies violence. Like even if the mom is nagging, even if like I don't think that, and also for that mom, I was thinking like, oh my God, sometimes we take the love that we think we deserve, right?
Yeah.
And I will talk to the mom and say, like, I know that she believes that she deserves. So that's another point that I wanted to say. Thank you.
Yeah, and that is a good point, Ruth, because again, as I said, the majority of survivors of gender-based violence, in this case, domestic violence, they also have had trauma from childhood, and that's why they normalize the violence, right? They justify the violence. They think that that's what they deserve, right? And maybe we are the first people who are helping them to explore that they don't deserve that there are other ways, right? And that they need to change that. And by asking questions, by strengthening what they already have, by making them visible to themselves and visible as humans, right? And that's why these conversations with them are very important, because that is going to stop someone from going back, or is going to support someone towards getting the right support for her and her children. Anyone else? Any other comments? Well, thank you for attending this presentation. I don't have anything else to go through, so if you have any questions or comments, then we have a little bit of time. If not, I understand that the topic is not easy, so people get a little bit thoughtful because you are processing that, right? So anyone, anything that you need before we leave?
I have a question. So you are working with a lot of mom that they have the husbands and that they going through court and all that. Is there any way that the court people that is working with the men can kind of refer some of the men that are appropriate to Jesus? Right? I told
Yeah.
also men need help. Somebody needs to kind of get them and help them in a way that they will understand and maybe join the other group.
Yeah,
Non-violent.
I think that I just think that it's great that Jesus has that program and that he gets men who come to see him. Uh, there are some men who I have witnessed how they behave, and no way they are going to go to access any support group or counselor, because it's about power and control, right? So uh, I have a friend who used to work with men's group, men who were court mandated to attend that group. And he said that it was so hard to make them understand about equality. And he said that if he told them, oh, yeah, it's the right of your wife to go to school, let's say, then they couldn't see like equality here. In his mind was, if she goes to school, she's going to have power over me. So then I don't let her go to school. If I go to counseling, she's going to have power over me. So for many people who use power and control and they are violent, it's about maintaining that power and control. So sometimes it's hard to convince them to attend some support. But there are other people they have a little bit of willingness, and then that's an opportunity. I know, for example, with this man, the father of the 14-year-old child, when I went to court with a woman, the lawyer, who is a cis man, is a self-identified man, her lawyer, he was scared of this guy. The guy is like a tall guy and is strong. So the lawyer was a little bit scared. And then I told the lawyer, I'm not scared. Why are you scared? No, because he's intimidating. You'll see. And so then when we went inside of the courtroom, first, the man, he looked so good, and he was talking as a lawyer, right? He was making a point about his rights. Then, when the judge was saying no to the things he was asking, then he started crying. And, oh, poor me, I am a good father. I have done this for my children. And then when that didn't work, then he got very the body language was intimidating, and you could see that he could be like strangling everybody who was there, right? He was just keeping himself, but his body language was very intimidating. The woman couldn't look at him because she was scared of him. And I was wondering, oh my God, like this is what people go through at home, right? Is the manipulation of coming and, oh, I am this nice guy and I have money and I am this and I'm that. And then when that doesn't work, then crying and poor me, I am a father, I miss my children. And then when that didn't work, he was able to intimidate everybody with his body language, right? So, yeah, I think that there's still, I believe that it's amazing to provide the support to men, and it's amazing when there are men who agree to have the first meeting and to attend support groups, because that means that there is a window of opportunity, right? And there are others who won't give themselves that chance because they are afraid to lose that power, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Maria, you have a
Yeah,
comment?
just to add to what you were saying regarding power and control, what we find out in our agency is that a lot of these men use religion and culture to justify their need for power and control.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else? Any other comments?
I don't want to be finishing in a negative note, but when I started with domestic violence, a mosaic or prevention or victim support worker, I met a lot of lawyers, and I felt maybe because I don't know, maybe because I was new in the field, but I felt the system could respond better to women and their families. I don't feel like that anymore.
Exactly.
I mean, I'm so glad that we're still here. I mean, I'm so glad to see you, Rosalena. I'm so glad that Marilyn is here and Jesus. And I wish there were more Jesuses. I mean, I know Guillermo had a really good program, and you know, he retired, but he's still working as a volunteer at Mount Pleasant, working with men. But I find what is most discouraging for me is how the courts treat women, especially women with no status who have been sponsored, who are already disempowered from the beginning. It just
Yeah.
tears up my heart every time I see
Yeah.
that. And the fact that it's getting worse, uh, women are more, I find they have never been that as mistreated as they are today.
Yeah.
I don't see the light sometimes, except for the fact that you guys are here,
Yeah.
except for the fact that that many people are working towards helping the families and the women especially. And then women, when they decide to go back, as bad as it sounds, and you know, you're hoping that this man won't kill them one day. Economics is the worst. We're in the most expensive province in the whole world.
Yeah.
But anyway, I didn't want to finish with that. Then, I mean, what I want to say is that thank you for doing all this work. Thank you
Yeah.
for you know, I'm gonna
Yeah.
call myself as the helper who tries to make a difference every day, and it's just bad out there. Anyway, that's
Yeah.
all.
And that's the reality, right? Like we all are witnessing that reality. And the other day I was doing a presentation for McGill University, and the people who asked me to be part of a panel were like 20-year-old young women who were having this panel for their classmates. And then they were asking me about what is the best thing in the feminist movement? What is it? And then I was trying to be like positive, right? But what I told them is that I have been in the feminist movement for so long, and I used to be an activist in my country. So I said that when we advance 10 steps forward, then we get pushed 5 steps backwards. And then you advance again, and then you get pushed. But imagine if we didn't continue, right? And what I have seen, like even in all over the world, that the left parties or the activists who fight for justice, feminists, created a movement, and then all of a sudden the conservative people took on those ideas. and they made them on, and then they use it against us, right? So, but still, what I think is that we are going to continue changing the world one person at a time, right? And if we can do two at a time or 5 families at a time, right? Like even this boy, the 14-year-old boy who called the police, and then he supported his mother. No matter what, he changed his life and the life of his mother because of that, right? So, and the mother then became aware of how huge that was, and now she's working and she's supporting her children. She's another person who didn't go back with the abuser, and so I hear that the state of the world is sometimes despairing, and it's a constant struggle, but we are here and
Yeah.
we are
I
needed,
was,
you know.
and Rosa, I wasn't talking so much about the war. I don't know. I mean, I'm hoping it's better in Quebec. I'm hoping it's better in Manitoba. I'm
Mhm.
hoping it's better in Halifax, because here, in the last 25 years, it has gone worse, the worst I have ever seen.
Yeah,
And I mean, I'm not an expert, but I'm just an observer and a helper. And when I hear people and the women coming, you know what, he got a lawyer and he got custody and he got this and he got that, I was like, it was better 25 years ago in a way. They were more stepping forward, and I think that's what you're saying, right? But I
yeah,
think I am saying the system in Vancouver, I'm not sure if the whole province, but the system in Vancouver is really bad. I don't see the light right now. I'm not seeing the light,
yeah.
but
No,
I just want to put a little bit of a twist to the positive.
Marilyn, yeah.
Yeah, to the positive,
Mhm.
because I
yes,
think,
please.
yeah, I think that the fact that Rosa is doing the presentation, she shared how when she's working with a woman, she helps them in so many ways, not only the court process, but then trying to get her training so she can find a job and supporting her with all that. That's what women need. Women need family. Women need community that really support them, and they go the long way. I think that I just want to, I'm pretty sure that all of you here, you're doing as much as you can, connecting with the women and Jesus with the fathers, and trying to provide the support to create that family that we don't have anymore, that community that we need to move on, to be
Exactly.
able to continue with the struggle. Thank you,
Mhm.
Rosa, for what you do.
Oh, thank you, Marilyn.
And
Yeah.
I want to acknowledge too that I'm sure that many other workers that are here too, maybe they also do that if they have that capacity in their agencies, in their workplace, because we need to do that, right? I just wanted to
Yeah.
put that little twist.
Thank you. Thank
It's
you.
like remembering the woman who picks up the seashells at the sea, and somebody comes and says, oh, why are you doing this? You know, what is the point? And she says, I'm making a difference in this one.
Exactly.
Yes, yeah, yeah. It's
Jesus, you
not just
wanted to
doing
say
one
something?
thing.
I just want to say that, well, thank you really, really very much, Rosa, for this chat. It was an amazing chat. And, I'm working with men. And one thing that I want to say is that I cannot see doing this work without women. And I think for me, that's a very important part, because I always say, no, if we don't work together, it's going to be very difficult that men stop doing the things that they are doing. So we need to keep trying to join and connect in some way, and try to work together against the violence, and against the system that is just pushing us all the time and is putting all those ideas on our heads. So
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Thank you. So thank you for joining, and have a great day, the rest of your afternoon. So
Thank you,
bye.
Rosa. Thank